Section 2, Field, Summary and Objects. Introduction. With the necessary background physics and thermodynamics developed, we now turn to detailing and describing the invention and its operation. Field of the invention. This invention relates to the fields of battery charging and electrical powering. Specifically, it provides novel processes, methods, and apparatuses for collecting radiant electromagnetic energy from the active quantum mechanical vacuum environment, as opposed to voltage and electron current from a conventional source, and using the collected energy for rapidly charging a charge storage device. The charge storage device can be at least one battery, at least one capacitor, or some combination thereof. Both negative energy and positive energy may be utilized. The invention invokes and exploits a new environmental amplification effect that can occur in resistive and inductive impedances immediately, and in capacitive impedances after a time delay. The excess radiant energy for powering is received from the active vacuum by free, asymmetrical Riga-Uging. The radiant energy is received in non-force field form being the spatial precursor prior to the precursor's interaction with mass to produce a force field. The received radiant energy can be converted into common force field electrical energy to supply electrical power for circuits and loads. In a first embodiment, energy input by the operator, as a conventional first energy source, gates radiant energy from the quantum mechanical active vacuum as an unconventional second input energy source, such that more energy for powering is output than the said energy input by the operator, in a manner analogous to a heat pump but utilizing the vacuum as said second energy input source instead of ambient air temperature. A second embodiment harvests the radiant energy for powering only from the vacuum, in a manner analogous to a solar cell but utilizing the vacuum as its sole energy source instead of ambient solar radiation. Summary of the invention. In view of the limitations now present in the prior art, the present invention provides a new and useful charger for charging charge storage devices and a charging process, as well as a new and useful electrical system power source and powering process, capable of rapidly charging the charge storage devices and also of powering electrical systems and their loads and losses. The invention is simple in construction, conditions and uses the active vacuum as its primary energy source, accepts input energy in a novel and unusual form, transduces the novel input energy and collects it in normal electrical energy form, and then dissipates the collected and transduced electrical energy to power an associated electrical system or device in normal fashion. The present invention uses a natural energy source, the active vacuum with its symmetry broken by strong gradients, not previously utilized in the field, and is thus more universally usable and more versatile in operation than known prior art. The invention differs from any other known technology in its operation and in its preparation, acceptance, and use of input energy in novel negative energy form. Thus, the invention has many features not offered by the prior art. The invention relates to a novel way to charge a charge storage device. In typical embodiments, the charge storage devices can be batteries, capacitors, other similar electrical components, or some combination thereof. In one aspect, the invention makes use of an inductive oscillator in a one-to-one transformer, or alternatively an inductor, to generate a high potential difference across a destination battery. The potential is collected on the plates of a capacitor, then is switched to abruptly discharge the selected capacitor into the destination battery. The sharp discharge gradient results in a burst of extra negative energy from the vacuum, thus charging the battery mostly with negative energy from this latter burst. A major advantage is that the destination battery charges with negative, convergent, energy, thus remains in a cold condition and has very little outgassing. In a typical application, the total current in the input circuit is no more than 200 mA at any time during the operation of the circuit, while negative energy pulses of 300 kW peak power are used for battery charging with great rapidity. The battery so charged with negative energy also transduces the stored energy into positive energy, and subsequently can be discharged to furnish positive energy to do work in conventional fashion. The invention may utilize any component or means of developing a potential in a capacitor for storage across a battery. The stored potential can then be abruptly discharged across the battery in a potential switching circuit to initiate the burst of negative energy from the vacuum. For developing the potential across the capacitor, the invention may use solar cells, generators, electrostatic machines, other batteries such as the primary source battery mentioned previously, high-energy ignition, HE, module, etc. For discharging the potential across the capacitor, the invention may use an SCR, MOSFET, IGBT, or other transistor, a contactor relay, or commutator of any kind. A difference potential is developed across the battery so that the semiconductors are in correct polarity when switching the capacitor discharge. NPN or PNP semiconductor devices may be used to perform the switching of the capacitor discharge. Across the battery there is observed primarily a transient discharge in the form of a voltage spike, as the negative energy burst does not register on most positive energy instruments. The greater the number of burst discharges, the greater the amount of negative energy discharged into the battery, and the quicker the battery charges. The invention utilizes the fact that the common potential V as used in M theory is actually the point energy density of the volumetric potential, since electrostatic scalar potential is defined as the potential's point intensity determined by its scattering from, i.e., potentialization of, a unit point static charge. The amount of energy W delivered to, collected in, the battery depends on the potential's point intensity V and the amount of receiving charge Q that is present in the battery, by the common equation W equal VQ. It does not depend on the amount of current furnished in the discharge. By using mostly negative energy in the discharge, the amount of positive energy current is dramatically reduced while the amount of negative energy current is dramatically increased. Further, by use of extra negative energy input from the vacuum to the circuit, every section of the circuitry having impedance exhibits negative impedance for the negative energy, and thereby becomes an amplifier of the negative, convergent, energy. This causes additional negative energy to be input into said negative impedances by said active asymmetrical vacuum. The circuitry thus becomes a collection of negative energy amplifiers freely fed at each amplifier by negative energy from the altered local Dirac vacuum, and provides peak power pulses of much greater convergent, rather than divergent, power than the power input by the operator himself. The battery receiving these powerful negative energy pulses is charged by volumetric development and movement of its own internal lattice and fluid positrons, not by insertion of extra electrons furnished from the external power supply. The fact that the primary input charging energy consists of negative energy allows very high peak power pulses to be received and utilized for charging and transformation to positive energy. The result is that the batteries are primarily charged by excess negative energy triggered from the active vacuum, but also convert their acquired excess negative energy into positive energy, for subsequent powering of circuits and devices in normal fashion. The invention also exploits the fact that any battery-powered circuit actually consists of two independent half-circuits rather than a single closed current loop circuit. The two separate half-circuits are, I, the external loop from the outer surface of one internal battery plate, out through the terminal attached to that plate, and into and through the external circuit to the other battery terminal, thence to the outside surface of the internal battery plate attached to said latter terminal, and, 2, from the surface of one of the battery internal plates, through the internal battery fluid, and to the surface of the other battery internal plate. Internally between the plates, primarily ion current is of interest. Charging with negative energy allows the internal migration of the ion positrons composing the positive charges on said positive ions. The invention thus enables the separation and partial separate movement of said internal migrating positron currents, without concomitant amount of electron or negative ion current. The invention generally comprises a section that periodically discharges a very sharp pulse of electromagnetic energy intensity in a system controlled by a semiconductor that, due to the circuit's use of predominantly negative energy, is connected to the circuitry with polarity reversed, as compared with conventions for semiconductor polarity in typical circuitry employing positive energy. This results in a sharp pulse of electron-free potential intensity, rather than electron current, thereby sharply increasing the energy density of local spacetime and curving said local spacetime, as well as lifting electrons from the local Dirac sea, leaving momentarily persistent Dirac sea holes, negative energy electrons, not positrons. As source charges, these sharply produced negative energy holes in turn produce a sharp pulse of negative energy M fields and potentials, spreading at light speed in the local vacuum and interacting directly with the ions inside the battery fluid, and on every point inside it. Hence, a little positive energy and appreciable negative energy are received from the vacuum/spacetime directly inside the battery, into the internal battery fluid and its ions, by the reverse-controlled circuit. This sharp pulse of mostly negative energy is directed across a battery or capacitor, reversely to the normal charging polarity, so that the battery or capacitor is impulsively charged with convergent negative energy pulses of up to 300 kilowatts, or even greater, peak power. By using convergent, negative, M energy, the positive ions Q in the capacitor or battery will and do accept the negative energy W from voltage V via the mechanism W equal VQ, faster than from normal positive energy chargers and processes. The reason for the much higher rate is that the triggered negative energy arises directly from the local curved spacetime everywhere inside the battery fluid, thereby reducing the necessity for all the negative energy flow or negative energy propagation to move down a wire or through the circuitry. Instead, much of the negative energy used to charge the battery arises from the asymmetric vacuum, curved spacetime, everywhere throughout the battery fluid, interacting with the local positive ions in said fluid, and this input is augmented by the additional negative input flowing in from the circuitry. Further, the negative energy flowing in from the circuitry is first amplified in said circuitry by all impedance elements encountered en route. Hence the battery or capacitor charges up very rapidly from dual energy inputs, with only a small positive energy electron current paid for by the operator but with two powerful negative energy flows, one which arises freely and directly within the battery fluid itself from said internal curved spacetime and the other which flows through the intervening circuitry to the battery and is freely amplified en route. In short, by suddenly converting the vacuum occupied by the battery fluid into an asymmetric vacuum, the broken symmetry of said vacuum injects very high negative energy into all parts of the battery fluid, adding additional rapid charging of said battery. The charging of the capacitor or battery also converts said negative energy into normal positive M energy, and this electrical energy can then be discharged in normal fashion to power circuits, systems or devices. Part of the system load can be such a charging system charging batteries via powerful negative energy pulses, while other batteries power the system normally with positive energy. As the powering batteries start declining due to their steady discharging, freshly charged batteries can be switched in to replace them, and the partially discharged batteries in turn can switch to recharging mode and be quickly recharged using the invention's powerful pulses of negative energy. A short time delay occurs in the battery after the unique potentializing of the positive ions inside the battery fluid. Positive ion currents are much more massive than electron currents, and hence in a capacitive section with negative energy there is a somewhat slowed reaction of the ions as readjustment currents that recharge the battery. However, when the pulse is removed, ends, the inertia of the overpotentialized ions continues their recharging motion for some time thereafter. Additional advantages exist in that, for the component of negative energy that does propagate through the circuitry, the sharp flow of negative energy passing through an impedance, inductive, resistive, or capacitive impedance, section results in the production of a negative impedance effect or amplifier effect wherein excess negative energy freely flows into said impedance section from the activated local environment and curved local spacetime, thus amplifying the output of negative energy into the circuit from said curved spacetime and negative impedance section. For the capacitive impedance section, the environmental amplifying effect occurs after a small time delay. The invention thus converts a normal entropic dissipative circuit, for positive energy, into a freely amplifying nejotropic circuit for negative energy, a novel function not previously accomplished in any other battery charging or powering system. An analogy with a triode vacuum tube will help illustrate the invention's energy amplification principle. The energy furnished by the operator is not the primary energy charging the battery and directed into the invention's system from the altered Dirac, but merely a gating and control signal analogous to how the grid energy of a triode, furnished by the operator, is not the primary energy directed from the cathode to the plate, but only a gating and control signal. In the triode case, the excess energy delivered to the plate over and above the signal energy delivered to the grid, comes from the cathode and its external power supply. Returning to the invention, most of the battery charging energy comes from the external altered vacuum as an extra free external power supply, said vacuum having been suddenly made asymmetrical by the sharp gradient of the pulsed potential furnished by the operator. The system is thus converted to a system far from equilibrium with its active asymmetric vacuum environment, freely receiving excess negative energy from said environment. The Dirac in such altered vacuum gradient will have some electrons lifted out, leaving Dirac negative energy holes which serve as source charges producing negative energy M fields and potentials. In a normal triode vacuum tube, the operator also has to pay for the excess energy delivered to the target plate by the cathode, so the overall COP of the triode is coefficient of performance less than 1. In the invention, the operator does not have to pay for the vacuum negative energy delivered to the target battery fluid, so the COP is coefficient of performance greater than 1 in practice. Coefficient of performance equals 20 to 100 is readily achieved for a system without positive feedback to provide the operator's furnished energy, and higher COPs are possible with that arrangement with additional tuning and refinements. When positive feedback of some of the system's output positive energy is also used to provide the operator's furnished positive energy input, coefficient of performance equals infinity is permitted by the laws of physics and thermodynamics of an open system far from equilibrium. Further, this feedback and coefficient of performance equals infinity are readily achievable by implementing the required governed positive feedback of positive energy. Via the EAMP effect, a multiple stage 1 pulse transformer actually serves as a powerful negative energy amplifier, with the input energy to the amplifier coming from the active vacuum environment. Multiple stages of such transformers can serve as multistage EAMPs. The invention's charged capacitor and the charging battery also increasingly exhibit the EAMP effect after some period of operation. The foregoing has outlined, in general, the physical aspects of the invention and is meant to serve as an aid to better understanding the operation of the system. Significantly, this invention can be embodied in numerous other specific forms in addition to the ones portrayed, without departing from the spirit or essential attributes thereof. Accordingly, reference should be had to the following objects and claims as indicating the scope of the invention but not limiting the embodiments and applications. Objects of the invention. A principal object of the present invention is to condition the local vacuum and curvature of space-time by regauging the local vacuum potential and breaking its symmetry, so as to provide an external source of extra potential M energy input to the system or process, in addition to the energy input by the operator or external power source. The availability of an extra free environmental source of input energy overcomes the deficiencies of those prior art devices which require that the operator input and pay for all energy that is input and used to power the system or process, its loads, and its losses. An additional object of the present invention is to take advantage of the usually divergence-free heaviside circuital component of energy flow in the space outside the conductors in a circuit, said circuital form of energy flow being in curled field form. While the divergence of the curl is zero in flat spacetime, in sharp gradients such as strong pulses with sharp rise time and decay time the local spacetime is curved, although TI is not modeled by conventional electrical power engineering and electrodynamics. In a curved spacetime, the vectorial divergence of the curl need not be zero, and so excess M energy is freely made available during the persistence of the strong gradient. Hence excess energy does exist in the local curved spacetime, in the form of the heaviside curl field energy converted into a mix of mostly curl field energy and some divergence field energy, and where said divergence field energy component is received and utilized in the circuit as an excess energy input freely received from the asymmetrical environment. Moreover, an object of the present invention is to provide an external, conditioned, second energy reservoir, being said conditioned and asymmetrical local vacuum and space-time, such that the excess energy input to the system or process from said second energy reservoir is also by means of asymmetrical re-gauging, work-free change of potential, which results in this excess energy being freely received by said system or process in compliance with the gauge freedom principle. The result is a practical mechanism and process that asymmetrically and freely changes, regauges, the potential energy collected in the system, and then uses this collected extra regauging potential energy as part or all of the energy dissipated by the system or process to power said system or process, its loads, and its losses. Another object of the present invention is to provide said external extra energy reservoir, such that by sharply pulsing said altered environment a strong gradient is established between said extra energy reservoir and the system or process. As recognized in non-equilibrium thermodynamics, said strong gradient places the system far from equilibrium in its energy exchange with said active asymmetric environment, and thus violates the equilibrium assumed by the second law of thermodynamics, thereby establishing a free flow of ordered energy from said external energy reservoir to the system or process for its collection, transduction, and further usage. However, as also recognized, the mechanism by which the strong gradient violates the second law of thermodynamics has not been previously understood either experimentally or theoretically, as pointed out by Condeputy and Prigogine in their definitive book, Modern Thermodynamics, 1999, p. 459. The present invention uses part of the unknown aspects. Another object of the present invention is to freely provide said external extra energy reservoir, and said strong gradient, so that Dirac electrons are lifted from the local vacuum, leaving momentarily persisting unfilled Dirac holes as negative energy electrons, further acting as source charges. Another object of the present invention is to provide said Dirac holes as momentarily persisting source charges, whereby said source charges pour out negative energy M fields and potentials via the asymmetry of the charges and the polarized vacuum with opposite virtual charges, and wherein said negative energy M fields and potentials and their negative energy are input to said system and process and interact with it, and where said negative energy cools the processes instead of heating them. Another object of the present invention is to provide said input energy from said free source of M negative energy in a sharply pulsed form, wherein said input pulsed negative energy is convergent rather than divergent, and wherein far more such convergent energy can be conducted without damage along the conductors per size than is possible with positive energy, and wherein the greater magnitude of convergent pulsed negative energy can be used to help charge a battery or capacitor up to 50 or more times faster than can be accomplished by using divergent positive energy. Another object of the present invention is that, through using negative energy rather than positive energy to charge the batteries or power the EAMP circuit, the batteries or the EAMP circuit are not heated or damaged, but are cooled, even though very high peak power pulses of 300 kilowatts or more can be utilized for implosive charging. Another object of the present invention is to provide said negative energy impulsive charging, which also can serve to partially rejuvenate and reverse many kinds of deterioration and cumulative internal damage of said battery or capacitor, by partially reversing previous damage or deterioration due to positive energy charging, thus improving and extending the life cycle of the component thus charged. Another object of the present invention is to provide said negative energy impulsive charging, with partial rejuvenation of previous battery or capacitor damage or deterioration from positive energy charging, such that the mean time between failure for said battery or capacitor can be extended, and wherein said system mean time between failure is extended accordingly. Another object of the present invention is to utilize said flow of negative energy through resistive and inductive conducting paths to a capacitive collector or battery, such that said resistive and inductive elements immediately act as environmentally driven negative resistors and as cooling environmental amplifiers, EAMPs, for said negative energy input flow along said path, further adding excess negative energy from the environment to the negative energy flow received by the collecting battery or capacitor. Another object of the present invention is to utilize said flow of negative energy through capacitive sections such as capacitors and the battery itself, such that said capacitive elements also act as environmentally driven negative resistors after a time-delayed operational period, and thus serve as additional environmental amplifiers, EAMPs, for said negative energy input flow along said path, further adding excess negative energy from the environment to the negative energy flow received by the collecting battery or capacitor. Another object of the present invention is to utilize the battery charging or capacitor charging in what for positive energy would be a reversed polarity. Another object of the present invention is to widely application in cooling of circuitry, as well as for general refrigeration. The future incorporation of negative energy circuits into the fabrication of microchips, both for self-powering and self-cooling, is expected to provide significant reduction in size and costs of great assemblies of microcircuits, presently limited by heating effects and necessity for separate cooling. Another object of the present invention is to utilize said capacitor or battery charging in reversed polarity, so that said battery or capacitor when charging acts as a transducer of the received impulsive negative energy, transducing the rapidly received negative energy into stored positive energy added to said battery or capacitor, without incurring the heating and damage that would result from use of positive energy charging pulses of such high peak power. The overall result is that said battery or capacitor receives negative energy impulsively and strongly at up to a few hundred kilowatts in peak power or peak energy flow rate, peak charging rate, while simultaneously transducing the rapidly received excess negative energy into excess stored positive energy. In this manner, the battery or capacitor is very rapidly charged with excess transduced positive energy, up to 50 or more times faster than can be done with direct input of positive energy rather than input of negative energy, use of free environmental amplification of the input negative energy by impedance sections, and conversion to stored positive energy as the battery is charged by negative energy. Another object of the present invention is to accomplish negative energy input and charging where said resulting transduced stored positive energy is substantially greater in magnitude than the positive energy input provided by the operator to evoke and utilize said process and mechanism. The excess energy is freely received in the excess negative energy input from the environment and through the environmental amplification effect, so that overall conservation of energy is obeyed at all times. Another object of the present invention is to provide said pulsed negative energy rapid charging method and system wherein the charged battery or capacitor transduces the implosively input negative energy into conventional positive energy, thus increasing the stored energy in said system or process as normal positive energy, although it was impulsively received from said external extra environmental energy source as negative energy amplified by resistive and inductive elements en route to the battery or capacitor collector. Another object of the present invention is to provide a system or process whereby negative energy is freely received from an externally conditioned environment, and where a combination of batteries or capacitors is used, and where one part of said combination is used in the role of a receiver/collector/transducer for the incoming negative energy while simultaneously a second combination of batteries or capacitors is used in a positive energy discharging and powering role for powering said system or process with normal positive energy, and wherein periodically the aforementioned roles of the devices are swapped so that freshly charged batteries or capacitors are placed into the role of positive energy powering units, and simultaneously the somewhat depleted batteries or capacitors formerly used in a powering role are placed into the receiver/collector/transducer charge receiving role to be rapidly pulse charged via the environmentally amplified impulsive negative energy mechanism and process of the invention. The result is a continuously powered system freely taking most or all of its required input energy from the external active vacuum energy reservoir. Another object of the present invention is to provide a system or process wherein the system or circuit is converted into a non-equilibrium system, freely receiving and utilizing excess energy from its active environment in a manner analogous to a common home heat pump with two energy reservoirs, one furnished by the operator and the other furnished freely from the environment. Analogous to how a heat pump expends a little energy to compress the air and thus extract a greater amount of energy than was expended to compress the air, the invention processes and asymmetrically conditions the external vacuum and curved space-time environment in order to extract more energy than the positive energy required to condition and process said environment. Another object of the present invention is to provide said system or process wherein the power input by the operator is also further made a part of the system or process load, so that the system or process becomes self-powering in that no further energy input by the operator is required, and all energy input used in said system or process is furnished from the external conditioned environment via free asymmetrical regauging of the system's potential energy, analogous to the operation of a conventional system powered by a solar cell array in a solar radiation environment, except that the active environment is now the conditioned local vacuum and curved space-time. Another object of the present invention is to provide a means of conditioning and affecting the fields and potentials of its external environment while they have not interacted with charged mass and thus are still in force-free and mass-free form. By this means, the invention is able to interact and condition its active environment via free regauging, without the requirement to do work, since there is no force involved in said reconditioning and hence no translation of force through a distance, which would require work. This invention deliberately exploits the present error in classical electrodynamics that assumes a force field in space by assuming that space contains the mass of a luminiferous material ether, the ubiquitously assumed unit point charge at each spatial point, more than a century after the Michelson-Morley experiments destroyed said material ether. The textbook definition of said M fields, their intensities, still retains a unit point charge and its mass in the interaction, hence still retains the material ether, although leading physicists such as Nobelist Feynman have pointed out the error. The invention also exploits the fact that normal classical electrodynamics and electrical engineering do not calculate and use the field and potential themselves as such, but only calculate the static charge intercepted point intensity of said field and the point intensity of said potential, and that the standard model erroneously assumes that a unit point static charge containing mass has been placed at every point in space, and also assumes the massless field in mass-free space is in ongoing interaction with the mass of said static charge. The present invention interacts with mass-free fields and potentials, the precursors of the material fields and potentials used in conventional electrical engineering and devices, and which precursors subsequently interact with mass to form the actual M force fields, in the absence of any point unit charge, so that regauging is the reaction utilized, not force field reaction with charged mass. This is a totally new electromagnetic function utilized in the invention, and this function does not appear to have previously been deliberately used in any prior art. The invention primarily interacts with and changes the mass-free precursor of the force field, not the force field itself. Changing a force field requires thermodynamic work since it is a material external parameter of the system, while changing the precursor to the force field does not require thermodynamic work since the precursor is not a material external parameter of the system itself, but merely a characteristic of the local spacetime and the local vacuum. Thus the invention interacts directly and work-free to change the virtual particle flux of the local active vacuum and the local curvature of spacetime, freely changing them by regauging under the gauge freedom principle. This directly alters the vacuum flux and space-time curvature precursor of force field and potential, and said altered precursor then interacts with the charged mass in the system or process so that altered force fields and altered potentials in the charged mass of the system are freely obtained, compared to what would have been present without the interaction and change of said altered precursor. This is a direct application of the principle that there does not exist in nature any conservation of work law, but only a conservation of energy law, and force interaction is not necessary to merely change potential energy or field energy, since such can be changed freely by regauging. With regauging, energy is conserved at all times but local work done on and by the system need not be conserved, Since the potential energy increases of the system or process are accomplished by regauging and are permissibly and freely made under the gauge freedom axiom in work-free manner. Another object of the present invention is to provide a system or process wherein radiant energy here referring to potential and field energy in force-free and thus mass-free form, and thus in the precursor form prior to formation of force fields and normal potentials already interacting with charged mass is used in the primary precursor functions of said system or process, rather than with force field energy and potentials that are already interacting with charged mass. This is a totally new electrodynamic system and process function not utilized in the prior art. Another object of the present invention is to provide a system capable of charging a charge storage device, or an electrical powering system or process, that is partially or totally powered by energy freely received from its external vacuum environment, and thus is more universally functional in today's market, and in diverse locations and environments, than the prior art devices wherein the operator must provide and pay for all the input energy. Another object of the present invention is to provide a system capable of charging a charge storage device, or an electrical powering system or process, that is partially or totally powered by energy freely received from its external vacuum environment, thus reducing or eliminating the need for and costs of external fuel, pipelines, external power sources, transmission lines from a centralized power distribution grid, and storage and transportation costs for fuel and fuel support and processing facilities. Another object of the present invention is to provide said novel system or process, or primary power source, whereby only standard electronic parts and supplies are utilized and required, and whereby only normal construction and manufacturing capabilities, procedures, and workforces are required, so that initial acquisition costs for the new chargers and power systems are highly competitive. Further, the great reduction in support costs such as fuel, transport, and storage costs, together with extended battery and system life and increase of mean time between failures, make the new systems much cheaper to operate than prior art devices. Another object of the present invention is to provide a battery charging and capacitor charging system and process, and an electrical power system, wherein a 1 transformer operates as an environmental amplifier for negative energy, and freely increases the input negative energy by free regauging from the external active environment. Another object of the present invention is to utilize a standard circuit, containing normal electronic components, in a novel manner, whereby negative energy rather than positive energy comprises the main energy flow in the circuit and interacts with it from the external environment, and whereby all sections of said circuitry having impedance, being resistance, capacitance, or inductance or any combination thereof, and comprised of any types of electronic components whatsoever, also act as free amplifiers such that excess negative energy is freely input to the negative energy flow in the circuit, from the external environment via the impedance sections. Another object of the present invention is to provide a battery charging and capacitor charging system and process, and an electrical power system, wherein the input of excess environmental energy is in the form of powerful negative energy pulses. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein a full wave rectifier is used to produce all positive going or all negative going energy input pulses from said active environment. Another object of the present invention is to provide a system or process whereby the useful output is usually greater at nighttime, or during periods of geophysical upset of the environment, than in daytime, but wherein conventional means are included to regulate the varying output to the output that is required or needed. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein an SCR or other solid-state semiconductor device is utilized in reverse to switch the negative energy pulses. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein a TRIAC or other device similar in bidirectional functioning is utilized to take advantage of negative energy flowing in an opposite direction from that of positive energy, under the same circuit potential or field conditions. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein a neon tube or other discharge device is utilized to switch the negative energy pulses. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, primarily using negative energy freely received from the asymmetric vacuum environment, wherein the full variety of normal electrical loads can be powered, such as motors, generators, electronic circuits, and other systems and processes. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, primarily using negative energy freely received from the asymmetric vacuum environment, wherein the standard closed current loop system is altered to become an open dissipative thermodynamic system freely receiving excess energy, in negative energy form, from its active environment, the active local vacuum and local curved space-time. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein the system or process does not output or introduce radioactive or chemical wastes, harmful exhausts, carbon dioxide, unwanted radiation, or chemical pollution byproducts into the environment. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein the cooling negative entropy effect of negative energy offsets or counterbalances the heating effect of the entropy powering components and loads, thus substantially reducing or eliminating net heat production released into the environment, which together with no emission of carbon dioxide substantially reduces the contributions to global warming of electrically powered processes and systems using the invention. The use of a negentropic process to furnish extra energy automatically provides a net reduction of waste heat released into the environment. Another object of the present invention is to provide power and propulsion systems for electrically powered vehicles, trucks, ships, trains, aircraft, ships, and other transport systems that do not consume hydrocarbon fuel or utilize nuclear propulsion systems, and do not produce harmful byproducts, emissions, and pollutants into the environment, while also reducing or eliminating the net heat released into the environment. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein the silicon-controlled rectifier or solid-state semiconductor is replaced by a neon tube, plasma tube, transistor, or other discharge device to discharge the pulses of negative energy in radiant energy form. Many other variations are possible, so long as the primary principles of the extraction, amplification, and conversion of negative energy in radiant energy form are implemented. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein any external source of voltage such as an elevated antenna wire can provide the potential required to charge the battery or capacitor with environmental negative energy obtained freely via regauging, and thus power the process or system and its loads and losses. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein a suitable timer and switching, such as a 555 timer together with an optical coupling switching device, are utilized to time the switching of the negative energy pulses of radiant energy. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, wherein a series resonant high voltage switching circuit is utilized to time and switch the negative energy pulses of radiant energy. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and power supply, and said switching and timing subsystems, and said collector/transducer systems, whereby the freely received negative energy pulses from the active environment are received at peak power levels of a few hundred kilowatts of power input without damage to the devices being charged. Another object of the present invention is to provide said charging system and process, and powering system, in a form easily scaled down for small packages powering miniature and small systems such as watches, clocks, and laptop computers, and electrical appliances, or easily scaled up for large packages powering large and very large systems such as electric automobiles, electric trains and trucks, electric airplanes, and electric ships and submarines, and large power systems regulating building-sized capacitors used in main power grid demand-filling applications. It is intended that any other advantages and objects of the present invention that become apparent or obvious from the detailed description or illustrations contained herein are within the scope of the present invention. Section 3, Functioning of the Invention. Introduction. This section presents the remainder of the drawings and their description, as well as the detailed operation of the invention. 3.1. Brief description of the drawings including recapitulation. The following drawings include a recapitulation of Figure 17 through Figure 25 used to this point, and further described by illustration in Figure 26 through Figure 36 the operation, advantages, and objects of the present invention. The full schematic of the typical system is shown in Figure 17, but the individual parts are first shown in Figures 10 to 15. A detailed description of the invention's operation is given in the subsequent paragraphs after these brief descriptions of the component drawings. Figure 17 shows the three components of the supersystem. These three components interact continually with each other. Figure 18 shows that the standard classical M model and electrical engineering include the physical system, but exclude the other two components of the supersystem, being the active vacuum and curved space-time. Figure 19 shows the operation of a prior art electrical power system, where the operator inputs and pays for all the energy input. Performance of such prior art systems is limited to coefficient of performance less than 1.0. Figure 20 shows the operation of a prior art solar-powered electrical power system, enabling coefficient of performance equals infinity performance. Figure 21 shows the two reservoir energy input system used in the prior art common home heat pump, and enabling coefficient of performance greater than 1 performance. Figure 22 shows the arrangement and schema for the operation of the invention in coefficient of performance greater than 1 operational performance mode. Figure 23 shows the arrangement and schema for the operation of the invention in coefficient of performance equals infinity operational performance mode. Figure 24 shows the mechanism for amplification of negative energy flow in impedance sections of the invention, when sharp gradients, pulses, are used. Figure 25 shows typical circuit elements that have impedance and exhibit environmental amplification of their negative energy flow, when sharp gradients, pulses, are used. Figure 26 shows a schematic of a first part of the system, being an inductance-coupled impedance-matching oscillator trigger device. A trifilar inductive, coupled transformer section also acts as a negative impedance and an environmental amplifier for negative energy, even though for positive energy it is a 1-type winding. The negative impedance freely receives excess negative energy from the active environment, so as to produce and amplify the input negative energy from the sharp gradients into greater negative energy pulses in the output. A full-wave rectifier keeps the amplified output pulses all positive above a reference zero axis. In this example, a 12-volt battery is used to power the trigger device. While a 12-volt battery is shown in some of the drawings, it is merely one preferred embodiment, or an example, as will be apparent to one skilled in the art after reading the descriptions. Other batteries could be substituted and other voltages used without departing from the spirit and scope of the invention. Figure 27 is an oscilloscope picture of the rectified above zero reference negative energy pulses that are output by the oscillator trigger unit in Figure 10, showing a rapid buildup and discharge of successive pulses, being part of the environmental operation providing amplification of input negative energy from the environment. Figure 28 is a schematic of a second part of the system, in one embodiment being a free-running 555 timing circuit that drives a high-voltage optocoupler for discharge of the high-potential charge in a capacitor across a series resonant circuit to at least one battery. In an alternative embodiment, a neon bulb can replace the timing circuit. Figure 29 is a schematic of the invention's high-voltage switching, environmentally amplifying, and battery charging operation. The SCR shown is mounted in inverted position, because of the use of negative energy. The battery part of the circuit, receiving the negative recharging pulses, is in floating ground condition and is isolated from the main grounding of the system. Figure 30 is an oscilloscope trace of the high voltage switching potential across the battery under charge in its floating ground situation. Polarity inversion is used in applying the signal, because of the use of negative energy charging. Figure 31 is a schematic representation of the scheme or process for battery charging from an environmental source of high voltage. A capacitor is charged to high potential. And then this potential is used to furnish a sharp negative energy gradient across a receiving battery, from a switching, amplifying, and discharge circuit establishing the sharp gradients with the external environment so as to provide negative energy pulses of substantial negative energy and power. Figure 32 is a schematic for one embodiment for providing the necessary high potential from the external environment, with the high voltage potential being furnished by an elevated antenna of 200 feet in length, 30 feet above the Earth. This antenna taps into and intercepts the Earth to electrosphere potential, which is a nominal 200 to 300 volts per meter. The connection to the high voltage capacitor, which may be of small capacitance, charges the capacitor to that potential between the antenna and the Earth. The resulting pulses from the system establish the sharp gradients with the local vacuum potential and curved spacetime, thus providing an environmental amplifier for negative energy and a negative energy flow from said altered local environment into the system and across the battery, charging it with powerful pulses of negative energy. Note that the battery is isolated from the earth grounding of the system, and is on a floating ground. Figure 33 is a schematic for a full radiant battery charger and power supply embodiment using an silicon-controlled rectifier in its switching circuitry. In this embodiment, the battery on the left side of the schematic is used as the power furnishing battery, and it discharges electrical energy in normal positive energy mode to power the circuitry. In the output there are two additional 12-volt batteries as the load, and these batteries are being very rapidly charged by excess, amplified negative energy furnished from the altered local vacuum environment and local curvature of space-time. Figure 34 is a schematic for powering a monopole electrical motor by the full circuit shown in Figure 17. For continuous operation, the roles of the powering battery leftmost in the diagram and of a recharging battery to the right in the diagram can periodically alternate. In this manner, battery roles alternate between recharging and powering mode, so that a freshly charged battery is always powering the system, while two batteries are recharging quickly using highly amplified pulses of negative energy freely received from the external environment. In this way, the unit is a continuous power unit for the motor as the desired output load, which in turn powers a shaft load which may be any normal shaft load used with electrical motors. This is a schematic for a self-powering system, freely powering itself and its losses and load with regauging energy freely received from its active external environment. Figure 35 shows an application system using earth cells with a potential switch and a transistor. Figure 36 shows an aspect of the invention in such a manner that the circuit's operation as an inverted potential switch can be better understood, considering also the use of negative energy rather than positive energy. The inverted potential switch can be further modified to optimize the receipt of negative energy through the EAMP effect. However, that will be the subject of a separate provisional patent application. 3.2. Detailed description of the invention. Because the invention is of unusual novelty and makes the first deliberate use of negative energy freely received from the asymmetric Dirac vacuum in charging batteries and powering electromagnetic systems, and also makes the first deliberate use of free environmental amplification of negative energy flow in resistive, inductive, and capacitive circuitry sections of the invention. A considerable summary of the necessary science was provided in Section 1 to enable persons skilled in physics and in the standard electromagnetic art to understand the invention's operation, objects, and performance. The following description assumes familiarity with the material and references previously cited in Section 1 on P51. Summary. The invention consists of a method, system, and apparatus to alter the local ambient active vacuum environment that surrounds a charging system, making said active vacuum asymmetrical, 2. Freely extract energy from that altered vacuum environment, and in particular to extract M-negative energy. 3. Provide free regauging amplification of said M-negative energy by additional receipt of additional excess energy from the altered active vacuum, a process called environmental amplification. EAMP, in circuitry sections having impedance and through which the negative energy flows. 4. Transform the extracted negative energy utilized to charge batteries into useful positive electrical energy, which may be further utilized to recharge additional batteries and or power circuits, loads, and devices, and v. Implosively charge batteries with high-powered, up to 300 kW in the examples given, or even higher, pulses of negative energy. It should be understood that scaled down or scaled up embodiments could use different peak pulse power than the 300 kW typical of certain preferred embodiments hereof. For very small applications, the peak power pulse used is much smaller, and for very large applications it can be much larger. In the examples given, the various operational parameters listed, such as 12 volts and 300 kilowatt, and the particular components such as silicon controlled rectifier, 555 timer, optocoupler, 1 transformer, 1 kilovolt diode bridge, etc. are simply with respect to a preferred embodiment, and other equivalent components and operational parameters can be substituted without departing from the novel spirit and scope of the invention. The particular schematics, components, and operations shown will allow an understanding of the operations themselves, and will demonstrate the principles and concepts for deliberately extracting and using radiant energy from an altered asymmetrical vacuum, the novelties of processing, amplifying, and using said radiant energy while still in force-free field form, and demonstrate circuits made from normal electrical components for transducing collected negative energy into M-positive energy, so it can easily be used in conventional fashion by conventional circuitry to power conventional loads and devices. The operational parameters are thus presented to illustrate a preferred embodiment or embodiments, for the purpose of teaching the invention, and not by way of limitation. Inductive coupled oscillator and diode bridge. The invention makes use of an inductive coupled oscillator, which is built around a 1-to-1 trifilar wound, 3-wire wound, transformer. The transformer is a 1-to-1 impedance matching device where all the windings have the same turns ratio. The transformer is wound on an open iron core with no closed flux paths. This impedance matching device serves as a trigger and amplifier for radiant energy collection. Figure 26 on P42 shows the inductive coupled oscillator and parts comprising the trigger device. The oscillator produces a stream of high potential spikes that are comprised of radiant energy consisting of high potential with high rate of change d, j/dt, with no normal current dq/dt but with high negative energy current of Dirac holes and negative energy flow. Thus d/dt 0, while I equal dq/dt equals 0. This oscillator uses inductive coupling and a very small resistance and capacitance in the wires that make up the transformer/amplifier itself. Because of the sharp gradient d, f/dt, electrons are lifted from the local Dirac C, leaving momentarily persisting negative energy Dirac 4 holes. Consequently, the oscillator involves a strong component of negative energy, and the impedances of the conductors and circuitry act as environment amplifiers for said negative energy. The oscillator will resonate at the natural frequency of the material used. The oscillator also self-regauges itself in a buck-boost operation, changing its own output energy density. A Litz-type wire would be advantageous to obtain maximum radiant energy transfer, maximum charge coupling and thus maximum current, through the transformer. The diode bridge consists of high-voltage diodes in the 1 kV range. The capacitor is chosen with a voltage rating suitable for the potential to be used. This oscillator has a very short duty cycle, where its on time is very short compared to its off time, as will be described with respect to figure 27. This is to optimize the sharp gradient characteristic and thus optimize the usage of negative energy as well as the environmental amplification, EAMP, effect of the innate resistances and impedances of the conductors. It may be seen from the circuit in figure 26 that the inductive oscillator is fed to a high voltage diode pack to capture the high voltage spikes for storage in a capacitor bank. After the capacitor stores the energy, a separate circuit selects the time interval for discharge. This latter circuit is isolated through an opto-coupler because of the high voltage potential. When the timing circuit switches voltage to the opto-coupler, the circuit then discharges the capacitor into a battery bank. When the capacitor level equals the battery voltage, the switching circuit then turns itself off until the next discharge. When using an SCR, the capacitance is chosen to be small in microfarads, LPF to 1 off. The silicon-controlled rectifier turns itself off because of the reverse polarity when the capacitor has discharged to the battery voltage level. All the circuits that control the opto-coupler are in parallel with the same primary input battery, as shown in the circuit configuration. Many circuit configurations are possible to those skilled in the art. The circuits for a preferred embodiment of the present invention use a similar one transformer as Bedini's US. Patent 6,545,444 but here the component performs a negative energy function in the circuit. The coil is made into an inductive oscillator using the transistor arrangement with added resistors. The diode bridge is similar, but the capacitor is changed in value and voltage. A 555 timer circuit is added to drive the optocoupler at a low frequency level rate to discharge the potential switching device. In figure 27 on P42 it can be seen that the oscillator waveform sharply builds potential charge in waves and that the on time is very short compared to the off time. The probe used was a ×10, so the peak voltage in figure 27 corresponds to a scale of about 160 volts before high voltage rectifiers receive the signal. Once received by the high voltage rectifiers, the potential on the collector condenser, in this aspect, is about 226 volts. The collector condenser may be a standard capacitor, where condenser refers to capacitor and collector refers to the capacitor's function in the circuit to accumulate energy then discharge it later. Here the capacitor is being charged by negative energy, in the manner previously described. Following local vacuum changes, radiant waves are always changing the nominal magnitude of their potential spikes while the oscillator is operating. As could be expected, the activity of the local night vacuum differs from that of the local day vacuum, since during daytime there is appreciable ongoing activity of light and thermal radiation from the sun, interacting with the local vacuum, and appreciable time-delayed effects from capacitive E-amplification occurs. At night, much of this interfering solar M activity that decreases Dirac hole production is reduced. Consequently, it has been noted that the radiant energy waves are appreciably stronger at night than during the day. At night, voltages from the inductive coupled oscillator trigger device have been measured up to about 300 volts on the collector condenser. The 555 timer circuit. Referring now to figure 28 on P43, the second part of this circuit consists of a free-running timing circuit for operation of the discharge of the energy received in the collecting condenser. Shown is a 555 timer set that resets itself for continuous operation at a set operating frequency, in a low frequency range. A neon lamp can also be used to replace the circuit, and in other embodiments of the invention such replacement has been successfully employed. The main purpose of the figure 28 timing circuit is to drive a high voltage optocoupler for discharge of the high potential charge in the condenser across a series resonant circuit to the battery, or batteries. The timing circuit operates as follows: the 555 timer is set to a low frequency pulse. This circuit is hooked in parallel with the inductive coupled radiant energy generator so that they both start up together. Thus, when the unit is switched on, the radiant generator is a free-running inductive coupled oscillator at about 25 kHz. For negative energy, it is also an E-amp. The timing circuit is a slow-running oscillator fixed at about 50 cycles per second, with a square wave output. The timer circuit output, when going high, triggers the optocoupler into operation. The 555 timing circuit is out of phase with the radiant oscillator circuit and remains that way under operation. The timing circuit only uses its current to cause the diode in the optocoupler to turn on when the 555 goes high or is pulled up to VCC. The total current dissipated in the two circuits together is about 120 milliamps, depending on which transistor is being used in the oscillator circuit. Series resonant high voltage switching circuit. Referring now to figure 29 on P43, we show the final part of the circuit for the preferred embodiment of the invention, which is a series resonant high voltage switch, herein called the switching circuit. The figure 29 switching circuit uses a special arrangement of I, the opto-coupler high voltage output transistor, and 2, a second high voltage switching transistor to make up a high gain switching Darlington arrangement to drive the gate of the high voltage silicon controlled rectifier. This circuit does not draw any current dQ/dt from the primary battery when switching, since the arrangement provides a voltage, potential difference, switch. The potential difference switch is inverted, in order to use the negative energy and the E-amp effect, as can be seen from the diagram. Thus, when the high voltage builds across the capacitor and the battery, the normal negative pole of the battery becomes positive in potential. The Darlington arrangement will bias itself on when the switching signal from the opto unit is triggered. The silicon-controlled rectifier will turn itself off when the voltage across the capacitor equals the battery voltage. When the silicon-controlled rectifier turns off, at this point the battery assumes its normal condition of positive and negative poles but with a significantly enhanced energy charge having been delivered, due to the negative energy utilized together with the E-amp effect. Excess energy, particularly in negative energy form, has freely been added from the active vacuum environment by the E-amp effect and by the use of negative energy and silicon-controlled rectifier inversion. The switching circuit is then out of phase with the primary circuits. The overall effect has been to move the circuit's primary operation into that of free asymmetrical RC gauging, where excess energy, mostly negative energy, is freely transferred from the external altered vacuum environment to the battery via the sharp pulse discharges, enabling free environmental amplification, E-amp. For the charging cycle, the system is thus in an open thermodynamic system configuration, far from equilibrium and freely receiving excess negative energy from its local asymmetrical vacuum environment. In thermodynamics, such a system can output more energy than the operator inputs, since the excess input energy is freely received from the active environment. Thus coefficient of performance greater than one operation and coefficient of performance much greater than one operation are allowed. Referring now to figure 30 on P44, which is an oscilloscope trace from a times 0 probe at 10 volts per division, it can be seen that the switching across the battery is just a high voltage potential placed across it. It should also be noted that the grounds of the parts of the system do not hook together in any way, except in the primary circuit. Other aspects of recharging and powering operations. The invention is deceptively simple in appearance, although its operation is very novel and quite different. The excess charging operation cannot be understood without understanding the negative energy operation and negative energy amplification of the circuit elements. The result is that much more environmental energy has been freely added to the charging operation by regauging, than the amount of energy that was input by the operator himself. Because of the excess negative energy freely input from the altered vacuum and particularly by the evocation and use of the E-amp effect, the total energy input to the battery for recharging appreciably exceeds the energy input by the operator. Because the invention uses negative, converging, energy, typically up to about 300 kilowatts peak power pulses may be utilized for battery charging. With most of this power taken freely from the active vacuum, the battery charges with remarkable speed and with exceptional freedom from wear and tear and normal damage. By powering an external motor or system from a negative energy charging battery, the entire battery-powered system can readily provide coefficient of performance is greater than 1 or coefficient of performance much greater than 1 operation because the system is freely receiving excess energy input from the active vacuum environment. To continuously power the coefficient of performance greater than 1 or coefficient of performance is much greater than 1 system, one may incorporate 2 or more batteries, where at a given time one battery is being used in the role of the primary powering battery while the other battery is part of the load and is being recharged by negative energy using this radiant energy charging process. As the primary powering battery begins to decline in performance, the roles of the batteries are switched so that the fully recharged battery is now powering the system while the somewhat drained battery is now being quick charged by radiant energy. In this manner, the overall system is always receiving excess energy from its environmental energy reservoir, in the form of negative energy used to recharge the batteries, and in the form of the EAMP effect initiated in the various circuit components previously described. The recharging battery portion of the system is also always acting as an energy converter, converting the charging negative energy to stored positive energy for subsequent powering use in the proper switching sequence. As previously mentioned, after several charging cycles, batteries charged by the invention also gradually develop their own local EAMP effect. As previously stated, the small amount of power required for switching can also be made a part of the system supported load, in which case the system becomes self-powering, powered by vacuum energy entirely. The system then exhibits coefficient of performance equals infinity. So in this sequential switching method, by incorporating the switching power as part of the system load requirement, a working coefficient of performance equals infinity system can be continuously and permissibly powered by energy freely extracted and converted from the local vacuum. The SCR may be replaced with a high-voltage transistor, a power MOSFET, metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor, or a high-power IGBT transistor. Using such variations, additional embodiments of the invention have been successfully developed by the inventors. As previously stated, the 555 timing circuit may also be replaced with a common neon bulb. Many other variations are possible, so long as the primary principles of the extraction, amplification, and conversion of negative energy are implemented. Usage with an elevated external antenna collector. Referring now to figure 31 on P44, a battery may be freely charged with negative energy, day or night, by using the scheme shown. All that is necessary, besides the circuit shown, is that a free environmental source of high voltage must be available. For use in the circuit of figure 31, the environmental energy source should furnish high voltage, not high current. As previously stated, for example, there is an environmental potential difference between the surface of the Earth and the electrosphere above it, of a nominal 200 volts per meter or more. The voltage per meter, however, varies with daytime or nighttime, with cloud cover, sometimes with the wind conditions, etc. Referring now to figure 32 on P45, the use of an elevated outside antenna wire as the environmental energy source is shown. The arrangement can freely extract and furnish a potential of 500 to 2000 volts or higher to a small disk capacitor. The height of the antenna is adjusted so that the voltage desired for the capacitor is what is furnished. Other modifications including an adjustable voltage divider, not shown, can of course be incorporated for greater flexibility and to leave the elevated antenna at a fixed position. The potential energy flows, see reference 6a, section 1, comprising the potential across the disk capacitor can be used in sharp pulses to initiate and provide very powerful negative energy flows from the Dirac. The environmental negative energy received by the system in the pulse discharge is used in very powerful and amplified, via the EAMP process, pulses to rapidly recharge batteries with the radiant energy process of this invention. The active environment furnishes all the required excess energy flow inputs. The battery or batteries may be charged by the radiant energy method, day or night, with nearly zero input of dQ/dt, nearly zero current. It is accented that most of the energy utilized to charge the battery in the system is regauging, change of potential, energy. Hence high potential is useful, but one need not seek high current. Regauging involves the potential only, and not the electron current. This shows the common, ubiquitous error in much of the standard power engineering terminology. For example, it is not possible to draw power from a source. In physics, rigorously power is defined as the rate of doing work. Obviously the power is developed in the local component performing the energy dissipation or change of form of the energy, performing work. It is not developed in the flow of energy from the source. The very term power source is thus erratically and colloquially used, not rigorously used. To properly analyze a circuit, the energy flow without work, energy transfer without changing its form, which is regauging, must be clearly separated from the energy flow with work ongoing, energy transfer wherein its form is also being changed. Variation of the radiant charger using an silicon-controlled rectifier. Referring now to figure 33 on P46, a full diagram of the entire preferred embodiment is shown. Here the 3-coil transformer acts as a gate and an E-amp amplifier to increase the excess flow of radiant energy extracted from the active environment. A small normal dq/dt current of about 200 mA maximum is used to trigger a standing potential of radiant spikes. These spikes then alter the local Dirac vacuum in the fashion previously described for the radiant energy battery charging method of this invention. With this alteration, the system is now far from equilibrium with its active external environment, and receiving excess energy freely furnished by that environment. Mostly in the form of negative energy. As in a heat pump, coefficient of performance greater than 1 is now permitted, by the laws of physics and thermodynamics, but the vacuum environment is utilized instead of the ambient atmosphere. Also, coefficient of performance equals infinity is permitted if the small 200 mA current requirement is made part of the system loading, with necessary regulating controls added, not shown. The high voltage rectifiers translate this excess negative energy for storage in the storage capacitor as previously described. The capacitor voltage builds very quickly to 200 or more volts. The object is that, during charging operation, only a potential, though one comprised of negative energy, should be found across the battery, with little or no dq/dt current flowing. When one is charging rapidly and high dq/dt current is flowing, one is charging with positive energy and coefficient of performance less than 1 operation. When one is charging rapidly and little or no dq/dt is flowing, one is charging with negative energy and coefficient of performance greater than operation. There is in fact a very high current of negative m energy flowing, in addition to the positive energy electron current dq/dt equal 200 mA, and that negative energy current is not a flow of electrons. That high negative energy current is freely furnished from the altered vacuum environment because of the Dirac having been asymmetrically altered by the sharp discharge gradient. This free flow of excess energy, in negative energy form, is not paid for by the operator, but is a free input from the active vacuum environment. Here we emphasize the multiple uses of the word current in energy physics. In simple circuits, current is usually used to mean a flow of electrons or of other physical charges. However, it is also used to mean a flow of pure m energy, whether of positive energy or negative energy. It is used to also mean a flow of potential, whether the potential is comprised of positive energy or negative energy. A flow of potential is actually a flow of the altering of the local vacuum potential. Here we are discussing energy flow and we have used current to mean a flow of potential and potential energy. The object is to build a very high voltage across the battery and then gate the silicon-controlled rectifier for a very high negative energy discharge, thus evoking very large negative energy current from the altered Dirac vacuum during that sharp gradient. Leading thermodynamicists such as Condeputy and Nobelist Prigogine have pointed out that sharp gradients are a known area that violates the second law of thermodynamics, although they have not realized that sharp gradients produce momentary bursts and currents of negative energy. What this known and recognized violation of the second law of thermodynamics means is that strong gradients can and do sharply break equilibrium and produce negative entropy, normally excluded by the overly restrictive form of the second law which assumes equilibrium, condition of maximum entropy. The sharply pulsed system is a non-equilibrium system strongly receiving excess negative energy from its active and altered Dirac environment. In the methods advanced in this invention, we deliberately utilize the free negative energy thus obtained from the altered Dirac, and we do not destroy it in strong system common grounding, as is the common practice. Such alteration of the Dirac to lift and hold excess electrons from their holes and leave the remaining temporary holes does occur during all strong M pulse discharge gradients. This is particularly true when only minimal electron currents are permitted in the pulse discharge gradients. However, the conventional closed current loop circuitry so favored by electrical engineers uses common grounding, forcing the immediate interaction of the freed Dirac holes with the material lattice of the ground conductors to produce positrons. In the, momentarily, strongly curved space-time in that pulse discharge, the 4 holes immediately eat negative charges in the material lattice of the grounding, usually without pair annihilation radiation. Rather than being radiated, the excess energy from pair annihilation is mainly consumed by the relaxation of the curvature of the space-time, by the regauging of the previously curved space-time itself. This immediate lattice absorption process due to conventional use of a common ground thus eliminates any effective use of negative energy and negative energy environmental amplification. It produces the excess lattice positive charges now called positrons, particularly in semiconductor theory. These positrons created after 4-hole interaction with the lattice material during the discharge itself, and after disappearance of the actual unfilled 4 holes are erroneously also called holes in the semiconductor literature. They are not negative energy Dirac 4 holes in vacuum at all, but only holes in the sense of absences, missing electrons, in the Drude electron gas, because they have been transduced, by interacting with the material lattice, into positive mass, positive energy source charges, and they emit positive energy M fields and potentials. At any rate, the method of strong common grounding during the switching process itself makes or breaks the ability of the circuit or system to have temporarily persisting real Dirac unfilled 4 holes and thus to have the freedom to apply the radiant energy methods of this invention. Common grounding practice, if meticulously followed, kills the 4 holes almost instantly as well as the negative energy and E-amp effect, leaving behind the lattice positrons with positive energy. From there on, the conventional circuit only involves a flow of normal dq/dt and normal divergent M pointing positive energy flow. In that case, all excess negative energy being freely received from the vacuum is deliberately and immediately shorted to ground and converted into the normal entropic, diverging, energy form, resulting in the normal entropic engineering used in all other conventional circuits and their common coefficient of performance less than 1 operation. When the capacitor discharges to the battery level, the silicon-controlled rectifier will turn itself off, because in the case of using negative energy the polarity for this device must be reversed in order to function as desired. If more current dq/dt were developed by the oscillator, the system would not work because the silicon-controlled rectifier would stay on. However, since this device optimizes negative energy field flow and negative energy potential flow, then positive energy dq/dt current is not materially present. Hence, the silicon-controlled rectifier will turn off in a standby mode until the next cycle, which is necessary for the negative energy operation and negative entropy, E-amp, operation. As a variant, the silicon-controlled rectifier may be removed from the circuit and a transistor or a FET may be put in its place. Since appreciable negative energy is being used in the invention, the battery pushes the ions to the opposite from normal recharging plates of the battery. The sign on the plate potentials is also as if momentarily reversed. A battery may be considered as a difference in potential, and the total potential across the battery is reversed from normal polarity because of the semiconductors used. In other words, the negative terminal for positive energy becomes positive in negative energy potential so that the semiconductors used will trigger this negative energy voltage oppositely from their operation in a normal condition. This inversed operation releases a sharply discharged radiant energy flow into the battery when the silicon-controlled rectifier or other devices are triggered. When viewed with normal instruments designed for measuring positive energy, this energy flow appears in the form of a very sharp negative energy spike. There is indeed a rather massive flow of current, but that current is in the form of electron-free negative energy fields and potentials from nearby Dirac C4 holes, and said negative energy is implosively charging the battery. On a charge that the positive energy field pushes, the negative energy field pulls. So the negative energy forces must be applied to the battery precisely oppositely in polarity to their positive energy brethren. A charging battery or capacitor does not care whether the ions are repelled from one plate or attracted to the other plate. As an embodiment example, the radiant energy charging process might introduce a negative energy flow current to the battery that is equivalent to 300 volts and from 500 to 1000 amperes. The impulsive negative energy goes into the battery very rapidly, recharging occurs, battery cooling and electrolyte boiling motion occur without any overheating, and the battery chemistry is restored to a good state much like that of a charged new battery. Not observed are, arcing, popping, overheating, violent movements of the battery, frothing, boiling over, strong gas emissions, melting, and so forth. Positive energy is divergent and therefore dissipative, heating, and entropic. To the contrary, negative energy is convergent, cooling, and negentropic. As previously stated, impulsive negative energy pulses can also be quite beneficial in often reversing much of the previous deterioration of the battery from positive energy battering. Further, to provide 300 kilowatt peak power pulses of positive energy, the operator would have to pay a very substantial price to input and prepare the positive energy required. But to provide 300 kilowatt pulses of negative energy being freely received from the altered vacuum, the operator only has to pay a few watts for switching and timing, since the negative energy is freely received implosively from the altered vacuum, and rather automatically amplified by taking advantage of the natural EAMP processes of the impedances in the circuitry itself. Monopole motor powered by radiant energy charger. Referring now to figure 34 on P47, a schematic of a monopole motor powered by the radiant energy charger process of this invention is shown. As can be seen in figure 34, 3 batteries are utilized in this particularly variation, with in and out switching so that one battery is used to power the circuit in normal fashion while 2 other batteries are being simultaneously recharged very rapidly by the radiant energy process using negative energy charging rather than positive energy charging. The great advantage is that this process is in the coefficient of performance equals self-powering mode. Actually, as previously mentioned, it is powered by energy freely furnished from the active external vacuum environment, analogously to a solar cell powered by its observable solar radiation environment or to a conventional hydroelectric power plant and its industrial grid, when the free flow of water energy from the river is accounted. In this process used by the invention, the energy is received from the active and altered Dirac C, in the form of excess negative energy input. It is used to implosively charge the recharging 2 batteries very rapidly, where their recharging is considered just a part of the system load, in addition to the mechanical load, not shown, that is placed on the shaft of the monopolar motor. After some period of operation, a part of the input to the 2 batteries comes from their own gradually conditioned EAMP and negative resistance effect. Any other kind of normal electrical load could be substituted for the monopolar motor shown. In addition, any normal shaft load can be added to the motor and powered by it. As an example, the shaft load of the motor can be a conventional generator, so that this system then becomes a self-powering electrical power generating system for remote use or for emergency use where a power line is unavailable or the power has failed. As such, it is highly suitable for powering remote homes and as an emergency backup power source for less remote homes when the power system or power grid fails, as in large power outages experienced in 2003 in the US, Spain, Italy, etc. It is also suitable for remote system operations such as in the Arctic or Antarctic, or in remote buoys etc. COP equal mode is highly advantageous in that the operator need not furnish any petrol or other fuel, or have a large windmill handy or a hydroelectric dam handy. Instead, all required input energy is being freely received from the active environment. Hence, it is a very great advantage when commercial power is lost due to such calamities as large forest fires, experienced heavily in the West in 2003, tempestuous storms such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and large ice storms, somewhat frequently encountered these days. Its advantage in case of biological warfare strikes by terrorists, part of our standard national threat, and definitely to be expected in the future, is obvious. In a great emergency, conventionally fueled backup electrical power generation systems may not be able to depend upon necessary supplies of fuel. In coefficient of performance equals infinity radiant energy powered generating systems, it is as if the fuel source, the fuel distribution system, the refining system and petrol distribution system, and the on-site fuel storage system have all been replaced and incorporated into a single local circuit and system. All those ancillary functions so necessary to electrical power generation are automatically furnished by the radiant energy system and process of the invention in coefficient of performance equals infinity mode. Using earth cells with a potential switch and a transistor. Figure 35 on P48 shows how the invention's potential switch can be hooked up to charge storage batteries from earth cells, where earth cells are slight differences in potential that are found on the surface of the earth itself and just beneath that surface. By placing several earth cells in series, the voltage may be raised, say, from a half volt to 20 volts. The earth cells supply only a potential of 20 volts with very minimal current of 50 to 200 milliamperes. In short, 1 watt to a few watts may be taken as the power coming from the earth cells and input to the system. This 20-volt potential is across the battery to the transistor switch. When the 555 timer circuit switches, the capacitor is discharged across the battery. In conventional positive energy, the discharge from the capacitor would be very little. However, as it discharges, the gradient forms an asymmetrical vacuum, so that suddenly the capacitor is discharging negative energy amplified by the e-amp effect in the capacitor itself, and the receiving battery is further amplifying the received negative energy by the e-amp effect. The result is that the battery is more rapidly charged with negative energy, and excess of which is freely received from the local asymmetrical vacuum via the e-amp effect. Further, the charging of the battery also transduces the negative energy into normal positive energy, so that the battery can then be discharged to power loads normally. Embodiment with an inverted potential switch. Referring now to figure 36 on P49, a final illustrative embodiment of the invention is shown with an inverted potential switch. To the battery, the switch appears as a load in the collector whenever the capacitor voltage exceeds the battery voltage by 1 volt. When the signal from the 555 timer goes high, the optocoupler turns on and the capacitor is discharged across the battery in asymmetrical local vacuum exchange fashion, taking full advantage of the excess negative energy available and received via the e-amp effect. The timing may be set by the 555 timer by adjusting the resistors that make up the timing loop. The semiconductors must be chosen for the correct voltage range. The semiconductors may be metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor, transistors, insulated gate bipolar transistors, silicon-controlled rectifier, or other semiconductor found to work well with negative energy. Mechanical commutation of any kind can also be utilized. The input can be coupled to any source that can generate high voltage spikes. Examples include inductive oscillators, inductors, DC-to-DC converters, solar cell panels, hay systems, generators, earth cells, salt water cells, batteries, electrolytes, inverters, or anything that can furnish the initial small watt or so to initiate the negative energy charging of the capacitor by the asymmetrical local vacuum. As can be seen, in this embodiment and similar, the invention can be used as a very substantial coefficient of performance, COP, amplifier for any other appropriate type of system having the necessary M output. In that function the invention takes full advantage of the asymmetric vacuum, its free supply of excess M negative energy, and the e-amp effect. The coefficient of performance amplification function is unique to the invention, and has great application as is readily apparent to power engineers. Its application to the powering of remote systems is readily apparent, in that it is analogous to applying a very high coefficient of performance heat pump approach but taking most of the powering energy from the local active vacuum, in an application where presently only purely resistance heating is being used. The inverted potential switch has also been modified to optimize the receipt of additional negative energy through the EAMP effect, but that will be the subject of a separate provisional patent application. Section 4, Advantages. There are many advantages of the present invention. A system advantage is to 4.1. Provide a very efficient, very fast system and process for recharging batteries easily and very quickly, at a coefficient of performance greater than 1 so that very little input power is furnished by the operator, while the remainder of the input power is furnished by the local environment. 4.2. Provide a process for recharging batteries with little input power by the operator, and where the extra input power utilized is in the form of negative M energy input freely received from the altered local Dirac of the active vacuum. 4.3. Provide an electrodynamic power producing and energy collecting process that utilizes as its major or total energy input the negative energy from unfilled Dirac holes produced in the local Dirac, where said negative energy is further amplified by environmental amplification, EAMP, processes, immediately evoked in resistive and inductive sections of the system circuitry, and increasingly evoked after an operational time delay in capacitive sections. 4.4. Provide a battery charging system wherein the battery is charged by strong negative energy pulses of up to multi-hundred kilowatts peak power, and where said battery is used as a collector-receiver of the negative energy pulses, and where the battery further acts as a transducer of the received negative energy into positive energy, and where said positive energy is then stored in the battery to be furnished to power external circuits and systems. It is noted that many combinations of timing the charging and discharging of the battery can be utilized, to include simultaneous charging and discharging where the discharging is to power some part of the circuit or system or all of it. 4.5. Provide a battery charging system wherein the battery is charged by strong negative energy pulses of multi-hundred kilowatts peak power, and where said battery is used as a collector-receiver of the negative energy pulses, and where after a period of operation said negative energy pulses are further amplified by the conditioned negative resistance and EAMP effect developed by the operating battery, and where the battery further acts as a transducer of the received negative energy into positive energy, and where multiple batteries are employed, and where some batteries are used in powering mode while other batteries are freely charging, and where recharged batteries and discharged batteries are periodically switched, so that continuous electrical power is maintained. 4.6. Provide the capability in 4.5 where the dual usage of batteries in the same system and circuit, together with effective switching, provides a negative energy to positive energy converter, and where the input energy to said energy converter is in the form of negative M energy freely received from the local altered Dirac of the active vacuum. 4.7. Provide a capability for converting a battery charging system into a system far from equilibrium in its energy exchange with its local active vacuum environment, so that said system becomes a system far from equilibrium, thus permitted to exhibit coefficient of performance greater than 1 even though system efficiency is always less than 100%. 4.8. Provide a capability for converting a battery-powered system into a system far from equilibrium in its energy exchange with its local active vacuum environment, so that said system becomes a system far from equilibrium, thus permitted to exhibit coefficient of performance greater than 1 and even coefficient of performance equals infinity even though system efficiency is always less than 100%. 4.9. Provide a system process that utilizes as its primary energy input the negative energy flow from an altered Dirac vacuum having unfilled Dirac holes, negative energy four-dimensional electrons, prior to their interaction with mass and thus their observation as positrons. 4.10. Provide a battery charging system and process wherein when the charging circuit is removed, the battery voltage does not drop back as quickly as a battery after recharging by a conventional prior art recharging system, because previous deteriorations in the battery from prior usage are corrected or partially corrected, and because of the EAMP conditioning of said battery over its previous operation time. 4.11. Provide a battery-powered system wherein said system freely extracts and receives excess positive and negative energy from its local Dirac, and uses said extra environmental energy input to power the system and its loads and losses while continually recharging batteries for switching into powering mode, thus converting the overall system to an environmentally powered, self-powered, system analogous to a system powered by a solar cell array, a windmill-powered generator, or a hydroelectric generator, so that the overall system is freely powered by energy freely received from the external environment. 4.12. Provide a system as in 4.11 wherein said negative energy is furnished to said battery in very powerful pulses for rapid charging, with improved safety, and where said pulses are in the hundreds of kilowatts of peak power range. It is again noted that, in scaled up or scaled down systems, this peak power range may be substantially reduced or substantially increased, as the application warrants. 4.13. Provide a battery charging system and process whereby effects of one cell in the battery being electrochemically weaker than the other cells in said battery are minimized because related adverse chemical effects are reversed and thus bypassed. 4.14. Provide an improved process for equalizing a battery comprised of a plurality of electrochemical cells, wherein the cell with the highest resistance, which in a normal battery charging operation limits the charge that all of the cells of the battery can take, is instead the cell that receives the greatest charging effect, with negative energy converging more strongly on the cell with higher resistance, and with the higher resistance acting as a higher environmental amplification, EAMP, effect, such that the condition of the initially defective cell is quickly mended. 4.15. Provide a system as in 4.11 and 4.12 and 4.14, wherein standard circuit elements such as resistances and inductive couplings are utilized as immediate negative energy environmental amplifiers, EAMPs, and where inductive circuit elements develop E-amplification after an operational period, and where the excess amplified negative energy is freely furnished by the altered external Dirac, so that the entire system becomes a thermodynamic system far from non-equilibrium, freely receiving and utilizing excess negative energy from its vacuum environment, and also transducing said negative energy into positive energy, and further collecting said excess positive energy as excess potentialization of said batteries, and further dissipating said excess positive energy and excess potentialization by doing work in the circuits and their internal and external loads. 4.16. Provide a battery charging system and process whereby the battery is brought up to full charge, and a slight overpotential, much more quickly than in conventional charging, and in a manner impossible to achieve by the energy furnished by the operator alone, but requiring excess negative energy furnished by the external active environment. 4.17. In addition to the battery charging function, provide an overall electrodynamic generator and power producing process that is an open dissipative system not in thermodynamic equilibrium, freely receiving, gating, and using energy from the altered Dirac as its active external environment. 4.18. Provide an electrodynamic generator and asymmetrical self-regaging system and power-producing process that freely and asymmetrically re-gauges batteries, capacitors, and systems by receiving excess energy transfer from the external vacuum environment, thereby increasing the Riga-Ugid system's potential energy asymmetrically and freely except for switching and control costs, so that said Riga-Ugid system can then dissipate its excess energy in useful loads, producing excess useful power and work beyond what the conventional energy input by the operator could accomplish. 4.19. Provide a battery charging system and process, and an electrodynamic generator and power producing processes that do not produce radioactive or chemical wastes, harmful exhausts, unwanted radiation, or pollution byproducts into the environment. 4.20. Provide a battery charging system and process, and an electrodynamic generator and power producing process, for powering useful loads and accomplishing useful work, where said system and process does not require a supporting fuel transportation chain such as trucks, ships, trains, aircraft, tankers and such, which themselves consume fuel and produce harmful byproducts, emissions, and pollutants into the environment. Instead, the system only requires the local energetic vacuum and curved space-time. 4.21. Provide a battery charging system and process, and electrodynamic generators and power-producing systems and processes that are simple and economical to manufacture and mass-produce, using standard parts and standard construction and manufacturing methods. 4.22. Provide a battery charging system and process, and an electrodynamic generator and power producing process that contains and uses negative energy environmental amplifiers, EAMPs, thereby increasing and amplifying the inflowing and input of negative M energy from the environment. 4.23. Provide a system as in 4.22 that utilizes a process and method for forming persistent Dirac holes as negative energy electrons and source charges, in its immediate active vacuum environment. 4.24. Provide a system as in 4.23 wherein the fields and potentials from the persistent Dirac holes are negative energy M fields and potentials. 4.25. Provide a system as in 4.24 wherein the negative energy M fields and potentials are utilized in powerfully amplified pulses of negative energy. 4.26. Provide a system as in 4.25 wherein said amplified pulses of negative energy are directed into a receiving battery or capacitor to rapidly charge it. 4.27. Provide a system as in 4.26 wherein the rapidly charged battery or capacitor converts its input excess negative M energy into normal positive M energy and stores it as conventional excess potential M energy in said battery or capacitor. 4.28. Provide a system as in 4.27 wherein the transduced energy stored in said battery or capacitor is then dissipated normally to power circuits or systems or loads or a combination thereof. 4.29. Provide a system as in 4.28 wherein said powering system simultaneously uses a part of the excess negative energy input from the environment to recharge additional batteries, simultaneously with powering the circuits and systems and loads. 4.30. Provide a system as in 4.29 wherein said recharging batteries are periodically switched into position as powering batteries for said system, while previous powering battery or batteries are switched into recharging position via some of the excess negative energy input from the environment. 4.31. Provide an electrodynamic battery charging system and process, as well as a generator and power producing system and process that contain sensors and pulse generators and control mechanisms, thereby to initiate electromagnetic self-switching and self-oscillation, and simultaneously altering its external environment to form Dirac holes as source charges producing negative energy M fields and potentials, and receiving said environmental negative M energy and collecting and transducing it into positive M energy, and dissipating said positive M energy to power the system and its loads and losses, without any energy input separately by the operator, thereby producing a self-powering electromagnetic system and generator furnishing electrical power to an external load, while switching batteries between powering and recharging functions, thereby enabling continuous self-operation of the system using energy freely input from the external active environment, so that the operator need not furnish any of the input energy. 4.32. Provide an open electrodynamic system and power producing process and system that is free running, while powering an external load. Section 5, Other Advantages. Several additional advantages of the invention are: 5.1. An embodiment allows a small input of normal M energy by the operator, from an external power source that the operator pays for, to gate the inflow and usage of a larger amount of energy from the active vacuum environment, in a manner analogous to the operation of a common home heat pump gating receiving excess energy from its atmospheric environment, so that coefficient of performance greater than 1 is produced by the system even though the system's overall efficiency is always less than 100%. 5.2. Other embodiments allow all the required energy to be received from the active external vacuum environment, in a manner analogous to a solar cell array-powered system receiving all its energy from its solar radiation environment, so that coefficient of performance equals infinity even though the system's overall efficiency is always T, less than 100%. In this way, once the system is up and operating stably, the operator's start-up furnishing of energy can be discontinued and the operator need furnish no additional energy input. 5.3. In coefficient of performance equals infinity operation, the energy flow utilized to power the load and system losses is extracted from the active vacuum flux in negative energy form, by providing a sharp gradient in said vacuum flux, thereby momentarily lifting electrons from the Dirac sea and leaving unfilled holes, which in turn act as source charges and provide negative energy flow into the system and along its conductors and components. In a capacitor or battery or both, the system collects the freely furnished negative energy and transduces it into normal M positive energy, and then the system discharges the freely collected excess energy as normal positive energy to power the circuit's loads and losses. Specifically, the system utilizes the first formed form of the Dirac sea holes, prior to their interaction with matter to generate lattice positrons and lattice positron currents, the latter being used in standard solid-state theory and electrical circuit theory. 5.4. The initial imposition of the Lorentz condition, use of half the collected energy to drive load current back through the primary source dipole and destroy its dipolarity, is avoided by the invention, since most of the M energy flow passes from the external vacuum directly into the circuitry in negative energy form, being amplified in the resistances and inductive components, and gradually in the capacitive elements, as the environmental amplification, EAMP, process, and THC and CE being introduced to a battery or capacitor to rapidly recharge it, simultaneously changing the received excess negative energy into excess positive energy collected in said battery or capacitor, and then discharging said stored positive energy as real energy powering loads and losses in a conventional manner. 5.5. The device and various embodiments can be made quite rugged, can easily be environmentally shielded, and readily operates in environments that are hostile to standard electric generators and battery-powered processes. It can, for example, be ruggedized to withstand accelerations such as 50 grams or more. 5.6. The device produces usable electric power without any adverse environmental effects, harmful emissions, or creation of pollutants. 5.7. The device produces usable electrical power without any waste byproducts requiring storage, disposal, or dumping. 5.8. Because of the healing process generated in batteries and capacitors charged with negative energy, batteries and capacitors have their mean time between failures, MTBF, increased. Hence, they last appreciably longer than in conventional charging and discharging systems, thereby reducing the quantity of spent batteries and capacitors to be replaced and disposed of. 5.9. In coefficient of performance greater than 1 variations, the system dramatically reduces its use of external electrical power requiring the burning of hydrocarbons, depletion of nuclear fuel rods, building of hydroelectric dams and windmill farms, solar cell array-powered systems, etc. It also reduces fuel processing, transportation, loading and handling, and fuel usage costs. 5.10. In coefficient of performance equals infinity variations, the system requires no fuel, input of external energy, other than the input of negative energy from its local vacuum environment, thereby eliminating any use of external electrical power requiring the burning of hydrocarbons, depletion of nuclear fuel rods, building of hydroelectric dams and windmill farms, solar cell array-powered systems, etc. It also eliminates the associated external usual fuel processing, fuel transportation, fuel loading and handling, and fuel usage costs. 5.11. If for some reason the system mechanically breaks or is abandoned, all parts are readily reprocessable and reusable. 5.12. The system is readily produced from normal parts and other normal subsystems, by normal manufacturing processes and installations already extant. 5.13. With the iterative switching of recharged batteries into powering mode, and discharged batteries into recharging mode, and with self-recharging, the mechanical motion and its induced friction usually associated with rotary generator devices for this primary power function allows the device a longer useful life cycle and greater reliability. 5.14. The device and process can readily be scaled up, so that a range of generators of various power levels can be produced. 5.15. The system and process enables ready and quick completion of some projects and systems presently either very difficult or impractical to produce. Examples are the practical, self-powering, electrical automobile and other uses in transport, including trucks and aircraft. Remote power systems requiring frequency fuel replenishment etc. such as remote buoys and warning lights can now be operated in coefficient of performance equals infinity format, with greatly reduced maintenance and servicing costs and with increased mean time between failures. Redundancy can also be built in, to further increase mean time between failures, and to provide higher reliability. 5.16. The device and process can be readily made self-timing and self-switching. 5.17. Operation and maintenance of the device and process are simple and economical. Training of operators and maintenance personnel is simple and economical. No highly specialized technical personnel are required. Stockage and storage of spare parts are minimized. 5.18. The elimination of hazardous wastes and harmful byproducts dramatically reduces the pollution of the biosphere per megawatt of power produced. As this device and system is used in an increased fraction of power producing applications, the pollution of the biosphere per megawatt of power produced will also be dramatically reduced. As increasing use of this generator is phased in worldwide, the beneficial effect on the environment is further augmented by the dramatic decreases in hydrocarbon fuels burned, nuclear wastes produced, nuclear fuel produced, and contamination and pollution produced by transporting and handling systems and processes. 5.19. The elimination of fuel transport and handling, and supporting fuel transportation means, allows the coefficient of performance equals infinity variance of the system and process to be used in remote applications that are challenging for conventional power units and difficult to resupply with fuel, and also eliminates the waste byproducts, pollutants, and financial costs associated with the extensive present fuel transport and support systems. 5.20. The unit is readily adaptable for undersea, space, airborne, and land-based applications. Under the great advantages for remote operations, applications in space, naval task forces on distant station, battery-powered submarines, etc. are particularly benefited by usage of the system and process. 5.21. Many electric power companies are presently installing enormous batteries, building-sized, to store excess power during lesser drain periods, using that excess power capability when transient or temporary increases in energy demands are encountered. By scaling up and applying the system and process, the very large investment in such a large battery can be extraordinarily capitalized by having it also become a coefficient of performance equals infinity generator facility, freely extracting its charging and recharging energy from the local altered Dirac and dramatically lowering electricity costs. 5.22. Scaled-up units are adaptable for powering a variety of applications such as vehicles, houses, offices, factories, offices, buildings, ships, trains, trucks, remote installations, aircraft, and undersea craft. 5.23. Reliability of electrical utility systems can be increased by incorporating the system, particularly in a new mix of decentralized power generation systems and a significant fraction of customers who utilize local power systems based on this system and process. The conventional centralized power system with its vulnerability to sunspot activity, magnetic storms, electromagnetic pulse, acts of God, natural catastrophes such as earthquakes, fuel embargoes and shortages, acts of sabotage and war, violent storms and tornadoes, and an extremely poor control system not unitized as a single system, etc. is transformed to a mix of centralized and decentralized systems. The redundancy of these systems assures electrical power survival and endurance under adverse conditions, and assures only gradual and graceful degradation of electrical power in the face of destruction or damage, rather than catastrophic failure as experienced in 2003 in the Northeast US, Spain, Italy, and elsewhere. Vulnerability of such a mixed centralized and decentralized power system to large electrical power grid failures, sabotage, and acts of war is dramatically reduced. 5.24. The reduction of atmospheric pollution, harmful byproducts, hazardous wastes, and disposal problems associated with the present hydrocarbon-powered vehicles will be of incalculable benefit worldwide. For example, the replacement of small inefficient 2-cycle and 4-cycle fueled engines with amp-powered battery-driven electrical motors will remove a major cause of much atmospheric pollution by unburned hydrocarbons from these inefficient systems utilized worldwide in large numbers. Replacement of coal, burning plants and diesel-powered transport will dramatically reduce the emissions of soot into the environment, thereby dramatically reducing global warming since soot has now been implicated as one of the primary causes of global warming. 5.25. Use of new super batteries in this device and process, incorporated to drive electric motors in automobiles, will enable practical, economical, high-performance electric cars that are agile and have a range limited only by mechanical maintenance considerations and mechanical breakdowns. A smaller mix of batteries can be used, where some of the batteries are being recharged while the others are powering the vehicle. 5.26. The elimination of fuel transportation, fuel packaging, and fuel storage will provide an epochal economic advantage of incalculable financial benefit at every level of society, dramatically lowering the cost of energy worldwide and substantially easing the provision of electrical power anywhere. 5.27. Manufacture of the units using the process is simple and straightforward. It uses standard equipment and assembly, with relatively unskilled labor. 5.28. Maintenance of the generator units is simple and straightforward, and for example far simpler than maintaining an automobile or a chainsaw. Many other advantages of the radiant energy charger and process have not been enumerated above, but the foregoing listed advantages together with the objects of the invention and other advantages appearing in the background section suffice to show the highly beneficial impact of providing electrical power systems fueled partially or totally by energy extracted from the local vacuum, in a wide variety of applications. Section 6, Remarks on Potential Claims. In the later formal patent application, the claims will be prepared by a professional patent attorney skilled in the necessary electromagnetic and electrodynamic arts and the necessary physics. In the preceding list of objects, advantages, and additional advantages, as well as additional advantages appearing in the background sections, we have listed many of the obvious bases for claims that readily come to mind. Due to the novelty of the invention and the energy from the vacuum process, the reader will see there are bases for many other claims involved. These will be legally and properly formulated by our patent attorneys in the final formal patent application. To reiterate some of the special features that provide bases for claims, these special features include 6.1. Alteration of the local Dirac C by inducing sharp gradients and asymmetry, so that excess electrons are lifted from the C and largely held in place, leaving Dirac C holes as negative energy source charges, negative energy electrons, freely pouring out negative energy M fields and potentials. Hence, excess negative energy is freely received from the environment. 6.2. Curving the local spacetime by inducing sharp energy discharge gradients, so that curvatures of spacetime act on the local vacuum to produce effects as in 6.1 above. Said curvatures of spacetime then interact back upon the system itself as well as the local Dirac vacuum. In this way, the system uses a process which affects all three components of the supersystem, including I, the system and its dynamics, 2, the local vacuum and its dynamics, and 3, the local space-time and its curvatures and dynamics. In this way, the invention is the first method, system and apparatus which deliberately alters its own external vacuum environment and space-time curvature environment so as to change the system into a far from equilibrium system, freely receiving and using excess energy including negative energy from said altered external environments. 6.3. Use of negative energy flow that in turn automatically generates negative impedances, negative energy flow amplifications, and extra environmental energy flow inputs of negative energy immediately at normally resistive and inductive elements of the circuitry and after an operational time increasingly at normally capacitive elements of the circuitry. This has the additional advantage of dramatically changing the present universal tropic engineering, i.e., as if a circuit or system were a leaky diode where energy is input, some of it is lost to the external environment in passing through the diode, and less energy is output from the diode. Instead, using negative energy and the EAMP effect, nejotropic engineering is accomplished, i.e., as if a circuit or a system were a triode, where the input power to the cathode is freely furnished from the environment, the operator need furnish only a small gating and control grid signal, and a powerful flow of energy from cathode to plate and output power from the plate is controlled by input of only a small grid power. Further, a governed feedback from the output can be utilized so that the grid power is also freely furnished, and the system becomes self-powering with coefficient of performance equals infinity. 6.4. Use of a 1 transformer as an environmental amplifier of negative energy flowing in the circuit, wherein excess negative M energy freely enters the circuit from the active and altered vacuum in each transformer inductive coupling. 6.5. Use of resistive, inductive, and capacitive circuit elements in a new manner, as environmental amplifiers of negative energy flowing in the circuit, wherein additional excess negative M energy freely enters the circuit from the active and altered vacuum at each inductive or resistive element immediately and at each capacitive element after an operational conditioning time delay. 6.6. Use of work-free regauging of the local vacuum itself, to convert it into a free environmental source of excess M energy and excess electrons. 6.7. Use of converging M energy, negative M energy, rather than diverging M energy, positive M energy, so as to pass far greater energy currents and pulses through the circuit and along a conducting element, than is possible in a positive energy only circuit and system. The capability to pass large amounts of converging energy down relatively small conducting sections allows small systems to generate, handle, and utilize very large power pulses, including in the hundreds of kilowatts range. 6.8. Process and variations are readily scaled up in size, and also are readily scaled down in size. For example, the invention can be miniaturized to provide self-charging battery power supplies for computers, with long life and little or no maintenance, which would have a dramatic effect upon laptops, portable computing machines, remote small data processors, etc. 6.9. Process and variations to freely alter pre-force, massless, causative M fields and potentials in space as they actually exist in mass-free form. Since these causative M fields and potentials act upon the system to produce all forces in the system, the invention is the first system that freely alters pre-force causal entities, which then freely change the forces which are acting upon the system to drive it. 6.10. In accord with 6.9, the invention is the first system which engineers force field-free precursors of force to freely and asymmetrically regauge itself and change its potential energy, converting its external vacuum and space-time environments into work-free energy sources, freely adding additional potential energy and field energy to the system for its use. 6.11. The invention deliberately violates the common ground closed current loop circuit practice used in electrical power systems, in order to break the symmetrical self-regauging of the said closed current loop circuit, and thus becomes a system far from equilibrium with its external active environment, so that said active environment can and does furnish net excess energy to the system in asymmetrical form rather than in symmetrical form. Of particular interest and use is the copious negative energy thus freely received from the environment. 6.12. The invention is the first system that freely alters the forces affecting and driving it, by freely altering the pre-causal entities that generate the forces themselves. In this way, the system functions as a non-equilibrium system, and it can and does produce negative entropy operations as well as entropic operations. When the negative entropy operations equal the entropy producing operations, the system is said to be self-powering, which means it is completely powered by energy from its active external environment and exhibits coefficient of performance equals infinity. No other electrical power system deliberately develops and utilizes such negentropic operations for such purposes. 6.13. The invention is the first system to charge batteries and capacitors with implosive, convergent, negative energy rather than explosive, divergent, positive energy, thus allowing far more rapid charging of batteries and capacitors without damage. 6.14. The system potentializes in static potential flow form as a negentropic operation, and then depotentializes, dissipates, energy dynamically to power loads and losses in entropic operation. 6.15. The system uses common circuit elements, such as resistive elements and inductive elements immediately and capacitive elements after an operational time delay, to also function as negative energy amplifiers, freely powered by the external active environment in negentropic fashion. 6.16. The system uses the principle that almost unlimited potential energy flow and asymmetrical regauging are available from even small dipolar sources of potential, and it applies the principle by collecting the energy while in a positive energy current free mode, and partially in a negative energy current flow magnifying mode. 6.17. The operation of the system is not modeled by the standard electrical engineering model, since that model erroneously assumes an inert local vacuum and a flat local space-time. Both standard model assumptions are violated by the invention, which uses both an active local vacuum and a curved local space-time to provide free, excess m energy to the system. 6.18. The system violates the usual thermodynamics assumption of an equilibrium system. To the contrary, the invention deliberately employs a system far from equilibrium in two simultaneously active external environments, the active local vacuum and the active local curvatures of space-time. 6.19. The invention violates and extends the functioning of a normal electrical power system, which uses only positive energy. The invention deliberately employs a mix of positive energy and negative energy, and deliberately exploits the unusual characteristics of negative energy and free environmental amplification thereof. 6.20. During its powering, potential energy discharge, operation, the system isolates the original dipolar source of potential energy from the normal back EMF detrimental operations. The normal back EMF energy drains are only allowed to drain secondary potential energy collections, which have been freely created in the system by energy flow input from the external environment. The original dipolar converter of the energy from the vacuum environment is isolated from common system ground during the dissipation and powering cycle. It is also isolated during the special charging cycle, so that the normal back EMF limitation and forced symmetrical regauging does not occur. In this manner the invention can permissibly exhibit coefficient of performance greater than 1 or coefficient of performance equals infinity. 6.21. Under steady powering conditions, thermodynamically the invention functions on the average as a non-equilibrium steady state, NES, system freely receiving and using excess energy from its active environment, S. 6.22. The invention is deliberately designed to permissibly violate the present classical equilibrium second law of thermodynamics, by functioning in a far from equilibrium and sharp gradient manner already recognized and proven to violate said second law, as clearly stated by leading thermodynamicists such as Nobelist Prigogine. 6.23. the invention meets the criterion that if the solution is not affordable, it is not a solution. Many present solutions being pressed by the scientific and power communities are not really affordable. These include fuel cells, a nightmare when scaled up, tricky and dangerous, and still requiring fuels, nuclear power plants. The nuclear waste problem is already overpowering and unsolved, and it takes 3/4 of a decade to build and activate such a plant at tremendous expense. Cheap coal burning requires relaxing of environmental standards and increased damage to an environment already heavily damaged and reeling, particularly when the impact of rapidly increasing demand from nations such as China are considered. In contrast, the invention solves the environmental problems: no harmful hydrocarbon byproducts or radioactive wastes, etc., and is economically very attractive when compared to other proposed solutions. In addition, it has the advantage of dramatically reducing the degree of hydrocarbon fuels burned, and the nuclear fuel rods consumed, and the needs for additional pipelines and power distribution lines, even as it picks up increasing deployment at the outset. As another advantage, its use of negative entropy processes as well as positive entropy processes adds cooling as well as heat output, reducing the waste heat released into the biosphere and decreasing the impact on global warming. 6.24. The invention further meets the criterion that if the solution is not timely, it is not a solution. Again, many present solutions being pressed are not timely at all. The scientific community has spent billions and 50 years on pursuit of hot fusion, which has not added a single watt to the power line and is not likely to do so for at least another 50 years. The Department of Energy has in fact listed its fusion effort as its first huge new priority. Science, Volume 302, November 14, 2003, p. 1126. Even though hot fusion is still not considered achievable for perhaps another 50 years. Fuel cells, now being funded and pursued magnificently, will not be truly practical for some 20 years. In addition, it remains to be seen if such ticking bombs can be safely incorporated in transport, etc., or to power emergency generators for the home and office. They also are still dependent on fuel. Nuclear power plants, again being strongly pursued, will require appreciable time, from 7 to 10 years, to get online, at enormous expense, and they will further exacerbate the nuclear radiation hazards and multiply the unsolved nuclear wastes problem. Further, none of these centralized solutions does anything to unburden the already very inadequate grid and power distribution systems, which in the US alone require another $100 billion or so expenditure in the near future. In contrast, the invention lends itself to both large and small applications, and to either centralized or decentralized power distribution. Further, it can be developed and deployed with extraordinary rapidity, so that in 2 years a wide range of systems and sizes and output capabilities can be readied. Special adaptations such as for converting large overload assisting batteries in major power systems to become actual self-sustaining generators can be developed rapidly to further boost the capability, survivability, and flexibility of the present power grid systems. Combined with eliminating the need for fuel, the fuel distribution and storage systems, refineries, etc., the invention dramatically reduces the overhead logistics burden of power systems in which the invention is incorporated. It is indeed capable of being the timely solution so desperately needed worldwide. The attractions of magnetism. Could a little child be leading us to a free energy future? By Gene Manning. The search for new energy technology takes us to northern Idaho to meet a 9-year-old girl who won a science fair with a battery charging motor. She describes it as an advanced design that extends the life of batteries for an amazing length of time. The motor was designed by John Bedini and built by her. We meet him first. More widely known as an audio amplifiers expert, Bedini's name is intertwined with free energy history. Witnesses saw his machines running successfully, but later others were unable to build devices according to his published instructions. His circuitry was mentioned favorably at a conference in Switzerland recently. Aware of the controversies, with mixed feelings I drove into the Idaho Panhandle, past a warehouse for survivalist supplies. My hope is that he will give clues so others can duplicate his successes. Explaining his theory about such devices, new energy theorist Thomas Bearden is writing prolifically this year. Retired from electronic warfare studies and aerospace work, Bearden is the leading advocate of scalar potential electromagnetics, and he explains how the sea of energy we live in, an energetic flux of virtual particles, could be engineered to do work in the physical world. Bearden also has a theory about another of Bedini's scalar inventions, one which can increase enjoyment of music. After a 6-year struggle, Bedini was graded U.S. Patent 5,487,054 for a mechanism for reducing electronic distortion in digital and analog recording and playback. Bearden, writing in Explore Magazine Volume 7, Number 4, pages 53 to 63, says the patent examiner couldn't understand the mechanism, because Bedini's nonlinear optics process was not found in audio, or classical electromagnetics textbooks. Meanwhile, John and his brother Gary were already selling the stress defect relieving devices. The process even works for media such as color film. Bearden explains Bedini's process as self-oscillating, optical electronics, and hopes that even structural metals can eventually be treated with it to reduce stress defects. Is this negative entropy, self-ordering in the physical world? Bearden adds that most really new things are invented not by academic teams or corporate scientists but by the lone independent, fiercely creative people. I meet Bedini at his business, surrounded by electronics equipment. The back room looks like a museum of small prototypes of unusual motors/generators. Some are pictured on websites http://rand.nidlink.com/johnl or http://www.icehouse.net/johnl/tesla.html. He says his knowledge is on the internet, and now it's up to others to build the devices. He says they have to experiment themselves, and it reminds me that he taught a little girl how to make a motor, which drove science teachers nuts to see a little motor made of plastic with no return paths for the magnetics. The funny thing was that her father bent a coat hanger and put a coil above the motor and used it as a generator. The motor ran much longer under the load than they had expected. John Bedini was roaming the free energy scene in California in the 1979s and early 1980s, collecting knowledge about medical as well as energy devices. He had an electronics business in Sylmar, and at home he experimented with windmills and other systems. The utility company objected he was hooked up to their power lines, and if his system were to backfeed, it could extinguish the lights in the neighborhood. He disagreed. As he tells it, the official's final word was, "We think you're stealing power," and they took their meter off the building. However, his lights were still on at night, because of his energy inventions, he tells me. Finally they struck a deal: he would have his power meter back but would pay a high fee for the service. The power company almost took away their hookup to his shop, but it was in an industrial area and they would have had to remove a three-phase transformer and therefore deprive the other businesses of power. They found that when they switched off all the power in the shop, nothing electrical was being drawn, but the machines kept running. He published instructions for an energy device which Jim Watson of Colorado Springs then built large-scale with a heavy flywheel. Watson demonstrated it at the 1984 Bicentennial Symposium celebrating Nikola Tesla's arrival in the USA. At the same meeting, Bedini displayed a circuit which charges batteries. Only one engineer out of the audience, Ike Mueller of the European Space Agency, got up and measured Bedini's apparatus. He affirmed that it was charging the batteries. Dr. Hans Knepper's book Revolution in Technology, Medicine and Society states that Bedini's converter was 800% efficient in initial tests, and that 26 independent researchers successfully duplicated the device about which Bedini reported. However, the staff of the no longer published magazine Energy Unlimited was unable to replicate the devices, and consulting engineer George Hathaway criticized Mueller's measurements. On the other hand, a presenter at the 1985 USPA conference, Ken Moore, found that his model of Bedini's G-field generator increased speed as its load increased. He also witnessed a Bedini prototype successfully operating. The same year, Radio KABC talk show host Bill Jenkins used his guest speaker's spot at a March 12 town hall forum at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles to announce a free energy device, with Bedini and Stephen Wirth. The two demonstrated what was described as a Cromray gravity field generator with 180% efficiency, powered by a battery bank which required no recharging from an outside source. A newspaper account said the audience included public utility representatives and investment brokers. Bedini, the 37, told the forum that he planned to make his generator universally available to the public at a nominal cost, instead of selling to the highest bidder. He described his working model as using stressed, pulsed scalar waves out of phase, to tap zero-point energy of the vacuum of space. The concept was not found in physics books, but is perfectly natural and it works, he said. Jenkins had publicly introduced concepts such as scalar interferometry through one of his radio guests, physicist Bearden. How did the civic officials at the Biltmore Forum react to the free energy demonstration light bulbs strung across their luncheon plates? Bedini recalls the growled demands to remove the bulbs so they could eat. Free energy was not a part of their reality. Within a few weeks, Bedini was visited by two thugs who were definitely unfriendly toward his efforts to unhook from today's power structures. They had the appearance of bodybuilders who had just stepped out of a gymnasium, and pushed him against his shop wall while saying in a threatening manner that they expect he will continue to use gasoline. He laughs shortly while recalling the incident, but evidently knew they were serious. Now that he has moved to Idaho, the reason they don't bother Bedini anymore, he figures, is that he limits his models to toy size. His model collection only demonstrates a principle that he believes could power a house if scaled up in size. The principle involves storing discharged pulses of energy that are created while doing work with previously stored energy. The sequence is do the work, discharge, so the work, discharge and so on. The devices operate in a manner contrary to conventional motors and generators, I am told. You want the thing to do work. The more work it does, the more energy it gathers. Bedini says. A recent model, incorporating a bicycle wheel with magnets glued on the inside of the perimeter, has a large bladed fan angled to slow the rotation as the workload. Bedini unhooked part of his circuit to demonstrate the spark. He was showing how much energy is sent back to the battery, continually in step. Repeatedly the setup runs the motor for a certain length of time, shuts it off and then discharges. Bedini is scornful of experts who have visited him and can't understand why a small motor could be charging a battery yet the motor does not slow down. We understand what the energy is. Tesla knew exactly what it was. And it's the furthest thing from what they want to measure with their electron pushers. Today's instruments all measure electron flow, he said, but no meters are available to measure what is involved in his models. What, then, Bedini dealing with? It's electrostatic in nature, he replies, and must be converted into standard electricity. The rhythmic pop, pop, pop sound of a Bedini device comes from a blue spark which he describes as an ultraviolet type of arc similar to radio frequencies but no RF. It can be accumulated and discharged in pulses which then can be converted into electrons. If scientists want to build a big electron pusher, the answers are on his website, he said. However, Bedini has no patience with researchers who ask for specifics such as where to buy the magnets. Just go get them. Don't bother me. He said the devices only need to be tuned, and exact materials are not crucial. Use the type of magnets that fit your wheel. If you don't get enough output from the coils, add more windings. Or change the geometry. I'll visit the little girl and see if it is that easy. Earlier this year Shawnee Bauman wanted a science fair project. She found a book with plans for a motor, but looked boring corks and matchboxes. Her father promised the parts for a better one. He works near John Bedini, who instructed Shawnee for a couple of hours a day for a few days. She finished building it the day before the fair. We only tested it for like a day, left it running overnight sometimes, but sometimes we'd leave it running for an hour or 2 hours or something. The other kids liked it, that's how it was voted best of show. Adult judges gave her the other top prizes. She flicks the wheel into motion and it runs. This is the electromagnet coil. It what the power wire and the trigger wire. The power. Wire carries the voltage around the electromagnet coil and it goes through to the transistor, that little black thing, then it goes through the resistor and the diode, and the trigger wire follows it, and then the voltage flow comes out again and returns back to the negative side of the battery. The electromagnet generates the power, then it spins the wheel, the electricity goes through the generator coil which lights up the light-emitting diode. Then it starts all over again. We've been using this battery for a month or so now. It's supposed to have only 900 spins per 9 volts, and that's a 9-volt battery, so if it were to run out then would have run out a long time ago. She has changed the battery 3 times since building it 6 months ago. School's involvement in the new energy field adds impetus. Andreas Manthe, an instructor who organized a study group for free energy at the Technical University of Berlin, Germany. He says the German version of them impelled him back into new energy research. Jim Watson disappeared from the public new energy scene a couple of years after the 1984 demonstration, but John Bedini and colleagues are sharing as much information as they believe that they can share. Bedini views children such as Shawnee as our hope for the future.